You are listening to Unscripted Moments, a podcast about propaganda. This episode is a deluxe episode about natural disasters. Track 5 from Today's Empires, Tomorrow's Ashes.
Welcome to another Deluxe compilation episode, and thank you to my guest introduction reader. Natural Disasters is such an interesting song. It's one that regularly appears on the band's setlist to this day, which fascinates me considering today's Empire's era songs like Albright Monument Baghdad, the title track, Ladies Night in Loserville, or Bullshit Politicians never make the cut in the live set. Chris has mentioned a few times how much he enjoys this song, and I'm delighted to bring you this deluxe episode about the song. The beginning of the episode will feature a vocal cover by Paul Hodgert singing over the chiptune version of the song, which appears as a full chiptune cover album at screamingfastcore.bandcamp.com. If you haven't heard the chiptune version of the album, please go support the creator of that album. You can do that at Screaming Fastcore's Bandcamp page. 8-bit chiptune versions are available for the entirety of Today's Empires and the Potemkin City Limits LPs. So thanks to Paul for getting wild with the vocal cover over the chiptune version. The first part of this episode after the cover appeared on January 6th, 2021, featuring Keith, the original co-host of the show, and me. The second part of this episode appeared several months later with Dr. Andrew Klein, who is an assistant professor of English in Canada. We get into a pretty nuanced discussion. It's pretty in-depth about his interpretations of the song, and in my opinion, it is a highly worthwhile interview analyzing the contents and lyrics of this particular song. So thank you, as always, for checking out these deluxe compilation episodes. These are meant to be a sort of final word on songs for this podcast, so thank you for scoping out this episode on natural disasters. Enjoy. Hello, everybody. Happy New Year. Just a quick note on this episode for natural disasters. Keith and I recorded this episode a long time ago at this point. It's been sort of sitting in my hard drive for 2 or 3 months at this point. So this is not a super current conversation between Keith and myself. So we also were unsure about how we felt about this episode whenever we recorded it. We felt like we had a lot of loose ends, and we weren't really sure about how this one turned out. So comments and thoughts and ideas are totally encouraged and welcomed on this episode. So without further delay, let's get into the episode for natural disasters from today's Empires, tomorrow's Ashes. We hope you enjoy.
You're listening to Unscripted Moments, a podcast about propaganda, hosted by two teachers who break down a different propaganda song each episode. Today we're talking about Natural Disasters, track 5 from today's Empires, Tomorrow's Ashes, released on February 6th, 2001 on Fat Records in the United States and G7 Welcoming Committee in Canada.
So, hey Keith, I was thinking a lot about today's Empires, Tomorrow's Ashes today. And so I went to digging in preparation for our natural disasters episode, and the cover art is something that I found out some new stuff about that I thought was kind of interesting. The cover art to this record is the unfinished flag. It's called The Unfinished Flag of the United States by an American poet named Lawrence Ferlinghetti, who I believe is either the owner of or is like attached to City Lights bookstore in San Francisco. Have you ever heard of that place or been there?
No.
It's like this very, very famous bookstore that was really famous for like the Allen Ginsberg era of time. But so apparently Ferlinghetti painted the cover art to today's Empires, Tomorrow's Ashes. And interestingly, the exact same painting was used on the cover of a book that City Lights Publishers put out, because they also have a press in the bookstore, and the author is Michael Parenti. And so the same artwork from today's Empires, Tomorrow's Ashes appears on the cover of this book called Against Empire by an author named Michael Parenti. So, and that book like documents like the hidden costs of like the U.S. international agenda. I just thought that was so cool that this cover art, that this painting appears on music about U.S. foreign policy among other topics. Also appears on a book which is about the same topic. And so Ferlinghetti gave Propaganda permission to use this painting on the front cover of their album, and it also appears on a book on that topic. So isn't that kind of neat?
Yeah, that seems perfect for this band, right?
Yeah, totally. Keith, I know that like today also you were listening to Chris's Catastrophic Break with Consensus Reality podcast about Purina Hall of Fame, and I know there's a bunch of things in that episode about the Today's Empires, Tomorrow's Ashes era and the recording. What kind of like jumps out to you about that era of recording?
Yeah, so this is also recorded by Ryan Green, who did Less Talk, More Rock. It was the first time the band recorded digitally, previously using 2-inch tape. And Chris had the mistaken belief that maybe errors in playing or some missteps might be able to be fixed up in Pro Tools, which perhaps led to the album taking quite a few months to record, which is really different from Less Talk and How to Clean Everything. And the guitars are actually recorded twice. Chris went back to California to re-record them, and ultimately the audio, the production, the guitar tone has left Chris maybe not liking this as much as the other albums, and he ranks this actually lower than Less Talk, More Rock. And he said in an article, an interview with Vice, "We as a band were just backseat drivers through the whole recording, mixing, and mastering part, where we sonically ruined our own record. I just found it sonically not very listenable." So I think that's I see that come up some with fans, kind of looking through social media. this definitely seems to be one of the albums that people post about the most. And I do see some critique in terms of the audio, but for others, it definitely doesn't seem to be as important.
Yeah, and I noticed that as well. Like, to me, this seems to be an album that if I'm looking at hashtag propaganda on like Instagram or on Twitter, I'm constantly seeing people wearing the Ferlinghetti painting T-shirt. I'm constantly seeing people post pictures of this album on vinyl on their turntable at home, and so this to me almost seems like it might be, I don't know, probably like the fan favorite. I'm willing to say that this might be the record that a lot of people think about as like the best propaganda record. Yeah, and we're doing like a track right from the middle of the record that I don't think that, I've asked around a lot of people about what their favorite songs are to, book guests for this show. And no one has said that Natural Disasters is their favorite song, so this episode is guest free. Did anything else jump out at you about Chris's podcast episode from that era?
I think his description of the tendency for him and Todd to push songs harder and to play them almost at a speed or at a rate that makes it almost unplayable. He kind of refers to like a bike going down a hill, and once they're losing track and like losing control, then all right, hit control or hit record. And I get that vibe from a ton of the songs in this album, but not necessarily this one.
Well, and just as an aside, I know that in the top of the episode, you mentioned that this came out on G7 Welcoming Committee in Canada, and this is super interesting. So Propaganda, Jordan, Chris, and then another friend founded G7 Welcoming Committee, their record label, right around the time John K. Samson left Propaganda. And so I was doing a little digging on G7, and they describe G7 this way. The G7 Welcoming Committee is an idea of resistance, a welcoming committee to tell them, with words and actions, what we think of their power and neocolonialism around the world and at home, and that people are willing to fight back. And then they say that G7 now posthumously, G7 Welcoming Committee Records was a collectively owned and operated record label located in Winnipeg, Manitoba between 1997 and 2010. We released 59 musical and political artifacts in various formats by 31 bands and individuals. So this was one of those records that was self-released through G7 in Canada.
I remember having a compilation, a mix of releases from this, but I have to say that a lot of the artists I don't know kind of more specifically.
Yeah, and there was also the Propaganda compilation, and I believe that it was called Quantity is Job Number 1. So they have the Quality is Job Number 1, 7-inch, double 7-inch, and then they also have this Where Quantity is Job Number 1 compilation of like live tracks and demos and all kinds of stuff. So G7 is a pretty fantastic label. One of my favorite bands is the Rebel Spell, and they put out all their stuff on G7. Todd's old band I Spy came out on G7. I was listening to their record today. So anyway, Keith, let's talk a little bit about Natural Disasters. Can you tell me a little bit some of your favorite lines, the lessons you learned from this tune, or whatever else springs to mind?
Yeah, so what comes to mind immediately is that this is one of the few tracks where Todd and Chris both have like shared vocal duties. And I really like the songs where they kind of seem to split it down the middle.
Yeah. I mean, there's a few of those on this record, so it's more than I thought as well. I listened to the whole record today, and there was Bullshit Politicians, Ordinary People, March of the Crabs, New Homes for Idle Hands. So it's so much more than I thought. You know what I mean?
Yeah, and I think perhaps it's because they didn't overdo this. It's why I like it so much. And I can't really think of a track maybe after Potemkin City Limits where they both do that.
Yeah, it's like a really unique characteristic of Today's Empires, Tomorrow's Ashes, that they have these sort of like back and forth vocal stylings and this back and forth sharing of duties. So I really like that as well. What do you see this song as sort of being about?
So to me, it's clearly an indictment of the sexual puritanism that is commonly at the core of religious faith and identity. And the U.S. saw a rebirth in the abstinence and purity culture during the Reagan administration, which funded this form of extreme abstinence. It included abstinence-only education, purity pledges, and even clothing that was marketed toward these ideas. And it wasn't simply telling teens like not to have sex, but it also very strictly defined gender roles, teaching women to be submissive while giving power and authority to like the courting female's boyfriend's father, which is eventually exchanged for like the authority and the approval of the future husband.
Interesting. Yeah. And so there's a lot going on there. Like the lessons of, sexual attraction and relationships and who is in charge in a relationship. It's really tied back a lot to religion and like the lessons found within and what is acceptable. Does that make sense?
Yeah, for sure. So I think in addition, like just reading a little bit about this, women were also expected to take additional actions to ensure that, they themselves didn't tempt men, if that was their behavior, their clothing. So there's so much packed into this idea that I think it's easy to just see it as telling people not to have sex, where it's kind of defining how individuals see themselves and their own actions. And so if you think now you have like generation or maybe generations raised in this sort of belief system, emerging into adulthood, trying to navigate anxiety and shame that they've internalized because of these ideas about sex. And I recommend giving a listen to the Fresh Air interview with Linda K. Klein. It's called Evangelical Purity Movement Sees Women's Bodies as a Threat. And she speaks about the trauma and shame that's internalized and physicalized. And she compares it, not saying it is, but she likens it in a way to PTSD. I mean, there's panic attacks, anxiety, and in some cases, suicide. And she wrote a book called Pure Inside the Evangelical Movement that shamed a generation of young women and how I broke free.
Interesting. And as the father of a daughter, the way that women are told and, formed and raised in order to think about themselves and their bodies and sex in general, and oftentimes the double standard that how boys are raised in an entirely separate way to view sex. I think back on like the sexual shaming culture of like middle and high school, and even into college. Like there are so many despicable things in the ways that women are shamed whenever they, are sexual in any way, and how it's like a way to, oftentimes women are like set up to be torn down. Does that make sense?
Yeah, for sure. I think it's important to note, and this is something I really thought about a lot, is that the stigma of sexual exploration and maturity and curiosity is not simply just a religious issue. So Klein says in this interview, the purity message that I was raised with in the evangelical church is not very different than the message that we learned in society. In the church, we learn that you are either pure or impure, but in society, we hear about good girls and bad girls. So I think maybe if I didn't confront or encounter these ideas through religion, I definitely encountered these ideas through just culture and like the belief systems that people are ingrained with.
Yeah, and I also think though that religion underpins the good girl, bad girl notion as well. Like, sure. To me, religion is everywhere in society. It's one of those things that you can't escape, even if you're not religious yourself. Religion is still around you. And that, to me, is something that's really interesting as well, because even if you're done with religion and don't talk about it in any way, it's still there,
Yeah, and with that, right, there's like this anecdote in the center of the song about presumably children finding a sex toy with the image of Christ on one side, which, a quote unquote like normal family has, and they're hiding. And I don't know if this is an anecdote, if it's symbolic, if it's like real, but that seems to be implying something about our pretty complicated relationship, like as individuals, but also as like a society with sex.
And I have a feeling that this might be a true story.
I get that feeling too.
Like I think that I was watching a bunch of YouTube performances of this song Natural Disasters that I could find, and I think that in one of the videos, I think Todd said true story whenever he was introducing what this song was about, and he even got a sex toy out on stage and demonstrated, and so that was in there as well. But I think that it's kind of based on something true that actually happened to somebody in the band. That's my impression, at least.
Yeah, so when you asked what this song then means or what stands out, connecting with that anecdote, the line, "the most pristine are hiding everything." And that line to me is just at the heart of the song and the message. And not only thematically, but I mean musically too, because that's one that I sing every time it comes up. And when I hear that, I can't help but just think of like the slew of conservative politicians whose careers came to an end due to same-sex affairs after voting against LGBT right legislation. And I'm certainly not shaming them for those sexual experiences, but again, it points to how unhealthy our relationships and like our ideas about sexual identity in the United States can be.
Absolutely. And, Propaganda is very, very clear on where they stand on sexual orientation equality and rights. I mean, they've been outspoken about that for their entire careers. And there are several examples that spring to mind with regards to politicians. And one of them is a story that was super prominent a few years ago, and I remember, and it was the case of Aaron Schock from the state of Illinois, who was in Congress. And he recently came out as gay. So Aaron Schock was a Republican congressman from Illinois, and he became embroiled in a scandal and left Congress. And after he left Congress, he came out as gay. But for the entire duration of his terms in Congress, he voted against things like the Matthew Shepard Act. He voted against the repeal of Don't Ask, Don't Tell. But then whenever he was out of power, he came out publicly. And you can read his letter where he comes out on his Instagram page. It's like this very, very long, several images long document that he put on Instagram, where he talked about his revelation of being unwelcome by every member of his family after coming out as gay. Now, you have to remember that he voted against LGBTQIA plus rights for his entire congressional career. Then when he was out, he came out as gay and was basically, in his words, sort of like shunned by his family. No one accepted what he said. And, I know that he was programmed from a young age to hate gay people using scripture as a crutch, a hatred crutch, you know what I mean? And in a way, I'm trying to think about what that would be like to be raised to hate gay people your whole life, to be an intellectual golden child, so to speak, to be told this is the way you should think forever. And I guarantee you he was fighting these demons the entire time of, trying not to be gay. And then these things like Matthew Shepard Act would come up, or Don't Ask, Don't Tell. And his entire life he was said, vote against that, vote against that. And so, I'm trying to maintain like a sense of compassion for the experiences that he's had and his, coming forth as a gay person. But it's really hard to swallow that he set gay right, that he did what he could to set gay rights back.
It's a lot to think about and navigate. And, it kind of shows that we are all raised in systems of belief and power that shape us regardless of how we acknowledge it. And we all have like unpacking to do, and we all have our own sort of like mental, decluttering that, yeah, I really don't know how to process like all of those. And I think it's like super important in cases like this to hold individuals accountable for their previous actions, but certainly not to shame them based off of whatever their preferences might be now or whatever their identity is now.
Yeah, and to springboard off of like Aaron Schock, another example springs to mind of like, there's this guy named McCrae Game who founded a conversion therapy organization in the late 90s in South Carolina. And he came out as gay in 2019. And so he had an entire career based on converting gay kids into being not gay. And then after 20 years of inflicting pain and harm and suffering upon people, he himself comes out as gay. And so I can't imagine how many like anti-gay politicians and activists there are who are just gay and who despise themselves. You know what I mean?
Yeah, and so the next line then comes up is that, is this our decaying society, that Todd sings. And yeah, it's kind of maddening that we see sexual curiosity or confusion or exploration or anything that might veer off of whatever is ascribed to our gender identity and our gender roles. That those things are considered to be the rot in North America, in Canada, and the United States.
Yeah, it's insane if you're not heteronormative or fit into a perfect little mold of what it means to be like a sexually active adult. It's like seen as rot and decay. It's absolutely maddening.
And then I think my favorite line in the song is how the song closes. Don't condemn your life to be riddled with shame. Everyone's hands cause natural disasters. And it's definitely my favorite. And especially that part of just not feeling embarrassed about, who you are as a person. But I don't really know if I understand what that last line means about natural disasters, like the title of the song.
I have some theories on that. I was thinking about that a lot. Because you think about natural disasters like earthquakes and hurricanes and tsunamis and whatever. And it's like, well, what does this song that's about sex have to do with natural disasters? And, to me, this line is connected to the idea that human sin causes natural disasters to occur, by making certain behaviors forbidden instead of normalized. People grow up like thinking like, oh, if I do a certain thing with another person or with myself, it's sin so bad that it offends God so badly that like an earthquake is going to kill people. And that this is something that is in common discourse. I remember after the earthquake in Haiti, Pat Robertson said that the earthquake was caused by the people in Hades packed with the devil. Another example that springs to mind is Jerry Falwell. After 9/11, Falwell said that 9/11 occurred because of pagans, abortionists, feminists, gay people, and lesbians, and the ACLU. So, I mean, this is in the discourse of our society. There's another guy in New Orleans, John Hagee, I think. His name he was Pastor John Hagee. And after Hurricane Katrina, he said that, I believe that New Orleans had a level of sin that was offensive to God, and they were recipients of the judgment of God for that. He later retracted that, but he still said it. I mean, so, like, I know that these examples that, like, I've just said take place after the writing of the song Natural Disasters, which came out on Today's Empires, Tomorrow's Ashes in 2001. But those are things that get said in society pretty regularly.
That almost seems like a pretty obvious explanation and interpretation of the lyrics that I don't think I had really considered.
I mean, I may be completely wrong. And that's the great thing about doing this show is that I love seeing all the comments that have come in, like, after we've recorded episodes. Like, somebody recently sent me a message saying that there was a lyrical allusion within the Banger's Embrace to the band Concrete Blonde that Propaganda covers elsewhere. And so, I love getting in the comments where we're saying like, oh, have you considered this or have you considered that? And I'm like, no, I didn't consider that. This is something that Keith and I are just learning along as we go. And so feedback from the people who hear these episodes is so profoundly cool, because it just kind of makes these conversations that you and I get to have, it makes it alive instead of like, a standalone moment in time. It keeps it alive. So, there's a lot I love about the lyrics of this song as well. I love the back and forth of the two vocals throughout this Propaganda record. I think that I've come to see this record as unique among their catalog for how much they go back and forth. And then I think in another another episode that we did, I think on Bringer of Greater Things, I think that I said in that episode that Potemkin is where Todd sort of like came forward as like a more of a prominent force than Propaganda. But like I was listening to this record today, and Empires has way more Todd vocals than I remembered. I listened to it and I realized how long it had been since I'd listened to this record all the way through. I have this massive bias towards supporting cast and failed states that I had overlooked this record for a bit. So I think that I was wrong whenever I said in the Bringer of Greater Things episode that Todd came more forward on that record, because Todd is vocally all over this record, but it's just that he has more of his own standalone songs on that record, and his style is drastically more melodic on several Potemkin songs as compared to the thrash on this particular record. So when I think about this song, this is an incredible song about hypocrisy and, judging other people. There's hardly any lyrics. This song is super short. It's lyrically sparse. So many ideas packed in. So interpretable by any listener, Whoever listens to this based on their life experiences and how you've learned about sex, sexual orientation, sexual exploration and experiences, this is going to hit any listener in any number of ways, and it's not just religious, it's not just political, but those are the things that spring to mind to you and me, it seems. So whenever I think about this song as well, when I look at the news, I see people who loudly condemn stuff. And I know that many people who loudly condemn people who aren't like them, people whose lifestyles vary from them, I know they were brought up in a way that that's all they know a lot of times. You're brought up to condemn XYZ. XYZ is bad. And it reminds me of Megan Phelps Roper, who was in the Westboro Baptist Church for her whole life and is currently writing about her deprogramming as she figured out what that group is actually about. This song to me is sort of about that. The hypocrisy lies in many homes. People who are the loudest to condemn lifestyles they don't agree with, to me, also seem like the people most likely to be engaging in acts behind closed doors that they would never want anybody to know about. Mm-hmm. So if someone publicly shouts against LGBTQIA plus people, I have to wonder what types of insecurities and fears that person is hiding that would make them go so far out of their way to condemn another person's life who has nothing to do with them. To me, a massive reason someone might condemn lives that don't fit within the heteronormative white culture is because they are that thing that they've been taught to hate, and they're lashing out due to massive internal pain of being exactly what they were told to hate. Do you know what I mean?
Yeah, for sure. And so, Greg, with your other podcast, I know that religion is your area of interest in research and study. How else can you connect this song with your professional and academic interests?
Okay, so I have that other academic podcast about religion. It's called Classical Ideas. And anybody wants to know about it, you can find it on any podcast app. But on that show, I interview scholars, academics, professors, journalists, teachers. And so, I likely have a quite a different view of religion than a lot of folks who listen to this show or who like propaganda. Like, I do not hate religion at all. In fact, quite the opposite. Religion intrigues me because I see it like as a driving force so much in societies around the world. Like a religious studies professor friend of mine who hosts a great podcast called Keeping It 101 says, you might be done with religion, but religion isn't done with you. So, because like truly religion is everywhere around us. Religion is an underpinning social system that is heavily entrenched in so many major decisions that happen on planet Earth each day. So I personally am very intrigued with religion, and I seek to understand that because it interests me. It fascinates me. It's never boring to me. So, all that said, religion does create pain for people who do not conform or fit within designated internal social structures. Case in point, let's talk about gay priests for a second. This is an issue that is so prevalent going back to the Boston revelations of sex abuse crises back in 2002. It's documented heavily in the media ever since. In Buffalo, the city where I live recently, there was a massive scandal regarding the local diocese and, a bishop. So there was an article that springs to mind, February 2019, an article called "It Is Not a Closet, It Is a Cage. Gay Catholic Priests Speak Out." And this was such an interesting article to me. It came out in the New York Times. And it described how anywhere from 40 to 75% of American Catholic priests are gay. And almost no Catholic priests have come out publicly as being gay. But in that article, one quoted priest said he just assumes all priests are gay. And like they're representative of an organization that does not validate who they are, truly. And that's like super heartbreaking in a lot of ways because you get like one chance at life. And it can be lived authentically or inauthentically. But, driving away gay congregants for years and years by calling quote-unquote homosexual tendencies as disordered, and these words are said by gay priests. And, that's just something that makes me think a lot about this song and, how people who condemn things super loudly are often the thing that they are told to hate, and how that is so pathological in human nature.
So you want to talk about the music for a little bit?
Let's talk about the music, because that's a little more positive. Keith, go ahead and tell me what you like about this tune.
I think this song is a really great example on how the band creates these really great, memorable riffs that all fit together, but never really become repetitive with, like a chorus verse structure. The opening riff is one of the most memorable on the album, and I think it's actually why I picked this song last week when we were trying to pick through. I was like, I already had that kind of playing in my head, and yeah. So it kind of transitions into picking those power chords with like that twangy bend at the very end, and I think that's just a really great contrast to like that heavy, high opening riff, like that style even coming to mind. With like when we talked to Sue Lin about Tertium.
Yeah.
And with like my entry point into underground extreme music wasn't so much just like punk, like propaganda. I listened to a lot of metalcore in high school and early college. So that picking rather than just strumming those guitar power chords to me sounds like Strong Arm and then later Shai Hulud, who didn't just like do down strumming and making something really chuggy, but kind of substituting in like that layered melodic sound. So I really picked that up on this song, but in a few others as well on this album.
Yeah, and to talk a little bit more about that twangy bends that you were mentioning, I was listening to this song over and over today, and there's these little string bends under the lyric, I wonder what lurks in neighbors' drawers, and it accentuates the guitar, and it really grabs my attention, and it just makes me like lose it, because I love the attention to detail of throwing in these little flares that only make the song harder to play. It's not like they're making their lives easier to transferring the song to a live setting, but it just shows you the massive musical development that took place in this band between Less Talk More Rock and Today's Empires, Tomorrow's Ashes, where all of a sudden it's just like riff after riff after riff, and then that low high of this riff, where it goes like that low high. This is like signature Propaganda, and I remember Sue Lin talking about that as well whenever we talked to her one time. And it's just signature Propaganda, and like to me, this is maybe is this one of the earlier times where they do that sort of low high kind of guitar strumming?
Yeah, that sounds like it to me. I don't know if I can think of any other track.
I don't know. I'd have to go back and listen to all the old stuff, so I'm leaving it in. What do you tell me about Jord here? Because this is such like this is a special Jord song to me.
Oh yeah, and I what I love is stopping with each song and really trying to dissect, picking up things I never really noticed before, because the song isn't frantic like how Chris described so many other songs in Today's Empires. But this song is really, really incredible in terms of the drumming. Like his cymbals here, Jord's cymbals here, are great. They're just these constant splashes in places that you don't expect. And then at one point they just kind of disappear. Like when Todd sings, like we would sneak up to the room and we would pull out the shining dildo. And then right after that Todd passage of him singing, the cymbals pick up again. There's just all these great fills and like double hits. And, I'm not a drummer, so I don't really have the verbiage to describe things. But listening to the song repeatedly made me just pick up like these super interesting patterns and grooves that he has going on.
Yeah. I love the drums on this song. It's got fantastic tom rolls. It's got a great mixture of cymbal sounds, as you mentioned. I love the hi-hat work where he's got those little splashes into an open and then an immediately closed hi-hat. I love this the steady beat as well. The backbeat is super unique. It's like boom boom bop boom 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 bop boom 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 bop boom 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 bop, like on the snare and the bass. Like it reminds me of more Fat Wreck stuff as well with the bass drum pattern on there. Like, and then I went back and I was like trying to figure out what it reminded me of. And I found Good Riddance. They have a song called Steps on Comprehensive Guide to Modern Rebellion. And the fast part of that song has that same boom, boom, bop, boom, 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 bop, boom, 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 bop on the bass drum instead of like the boom, bop, boom, boom, bop, boom, bop, boom, boom, bop. It's got that boom, boom, bop, boom, boom, bop, boom, boom, bop, boom, boom, bop, boom, boom, bop. So it's got that really fast beat on the right foot, which is super interesting as well. And it's also a song that reminds me of sort of like foreshadowing of future drumming Jord would do in Tertium Non Datur and Dear Coach's Corner, which I really loved. So to me, like this record starts off with like Mateka and then into Border and then into the title track and then back to the Motor League. These are like blazing fast songs. And then they go into this mid-tempo one, which really would fit in well with the first part of supporting cast. So I love the fact that Jord is sort of previewing his mid-tempo supporting cast drumming style here. That's really neat to me. So Chris and Todd, like when they calm down on the pace a bit, like Jord leans into this style more on future records a ton,
Yeah. And I think with it being more, it's definitely not a slow song, but it not being super fast, I can pick out some of those things that maybe I wouldn't have otherwise noticed.
Yeah, and you can hear, like, to me, when Jord does all those little flares, I feel like he might be able to have the space within the tempo to sort of pay homage to some of his drumming influences from when he was a kid. If you listen to like a bunch of like 70s rock and stuff like that, it's got that slower pace, and maybe he's doing a little bit of things that he creatively was inspired to do by old drummers, maybe like Neil Peart or something.
Yeah. And so I mentioned at the beginning how this album kind of is pegged for not having the best audio recording and sound quality. But I think the bass here sounds really great. It's heavy and it accentuates like those chugging power chords in the opening riff. But and then it has like these great harmonizing patterns that picking them out, like picking those chords, I think makes the song just like even more melodic. And if you could see a video of Todd playing this live, I mean, I was like, I didn't even notice at first, but I was pretty much just watching him the entire time during a live set.
Yeah, and you really should too. And there's a song. I love the bass on this song as well. I found a video of Propaganda playing this song in 2014, and the angle of so the sound quality on the video is terrible, right? But the angle of the video is directly underneath Todd. So imagine somebody pressed against the barricade right underneath Todd, and they're pointing the camera directly up at him while he's playing this song. It's full of tight licks. You know, the whole song is all over the place. It's just absolutely delightful on bass.
So what else stands out from this song musically?
I love the massive change of pace coming off the heels of the first four songs. Those first four songs, I mean, are so great and so fast. And then this is a nice break within the record. And so I was also thinking about how this song would fit in live. And I picked up my copy of Live from Occupied Territory, the DVD that you and I both have. And on that set, they opened up with COINTELPRO, and then I noticed that Natural Disasters is third on the set list on the DVD. So to me, this is like a really fantastic strategy for a live band like Propaganda. Unless you have time and space backstage for a proper physical warm-up, you cannot come out and, go right into Purina Hall of Fame.
Yeah.
Your body will freak out. And, and these guys, I mean, it's been a number of years now since they did this record, but, they're still like, I don't know, maybe 30 years old when this record came out, maybe late 20s, early 30s. And so you need to physically warm up the older you get. Getting out of bed after age 30 doesn't feel the same as when you're in your early 20s. Things just don't work right. So to me, having these mid-tempo songs like COINTELPRO or Natural Disasters is like a perfect live strategy for getting warmed up before you go into the rippers later on, whenever you're like feeling good, feeling loose. And I love the so there was something funny that I noticed about the vocal delivery. And I couldn't figure out what a certain section of the song reminded me of, and I finally figured it out. So they have the part that says, not hedonists, not atheists, churchgoers, block parents. And something clicked in my brain, and I remembered the Bouncing Souls have this joke song on The Good, the Bad, and the Argyle called Inspection Station, where the lyrics are, I'm in the inspection station, waiting to be inspected. I got my new plates, new registration. And I was like, not hedonists, not atheists. I got my new plates, new registration. And it was just ridiculous. And I felt so stupid. But I was like, what does that one little line remind me of? Because it's this very serious, very heavy song. And then I was like being reminded of like this joke song. And it sort of lightened the mood a little bit for me.
Yeah, for sure.
So what are some of your like big lessons that you take away from this song?
So I think far too often we've conflated education or prevention programs with morality. Substance abuse also comes to mind as well. I mean, especially amid the opioid epidemic right now. And I don't know what the answer is to deal with things like prevention education, or if you just want to call it education, but helping young people navigate what comes along with sexual exploration seems to my mind to be like way more effective, a more effective way to talk to people about sex and then everything that comes with it, like the emotional ups and downs, the opportunity to physically express the notion of love and the variety of like positive, negative, and benign physiological consequences. But reducing sexual education to just morality and purity, I think it's just clear that it does more harm than good. And that should be just absurdly obvious by now.
Yeah, and so to me, my big takeaway from this song is like when I see people like railing against a lifestyle that differs from them, that is for some reason in the view of that person evil or like an abomination, I just can't help but think that there's so much more going on inside the person making all those wild accusations. And I know that when they lash out, they are hurting so many people. So their lashing out comes at the expense of people who get murdered, right. People who are face years and years of bullying and abuse and violence, and sometimes are even killed. And so, like, people who, like, bag on other lifestyles, especially publicly bagging on different lifestyles, is, like, so indicative of also, like, a very, very deep self-hatred. And I wish that there was, I wish that conversion therapy guy hadn't spent 20 years hurting people before he decided to come clean. And, like, these are the things that, like, I'm like, you spend your whole life hurting people, and then all of a sudden you're like, oh, forgive me, this is what was going on. And I'm like, oh my God, you did untold amounts of pain and suffering while ripping on people your entire career and your entire life. And the whole time, all it was you were just embarrassed of what people might think of you if you said what you really were.
Yeah.
It's hard. And, like, so this song is, and maybe this song is about none of these things, but to me, this is what it talks about. The most pristine are hiding everything, and you have this shiny veneer that is presented to the world. You're this young upstart congressman, and you're shiny and handsome and dress well, and your voting agenda legitimately hurts people, deprives people of equality and dignity. And so that's what I think about when I listen to this song. Did you find any did you go on YouTube and find any fan comments?
So I did so when you were given some background on some politicians who got themselves into a little bit of trouble. And I found one that says, I like to think the title of the song refers to Christian hypocrites, especially televangelists, who claim that natural disasters are caused by homosexuality and other sins, but are often outed as being such or having other shady past. So I think that really closely mirrors, like, your interpretation of natural disasters.
I think it does, yeah. Oh, I see. You mentioned to me earlier that you might have a resource you'd like to talk about as well. Do you want to still talk about that?
Yeah. So if you're interested, I really recommend that interview I mentioned from Fresh Air with Linda K. Klein. But she also has an organization called Break Free Together, and it says on the website, Break Free Together is a community committed to breaking the silence around shame from purity culture and helping individuals raised in these communities kind of figure out those ideas that they've internalized and possibly, like, physicalized.
Okay, Keith, moment of truth. How do you rank this song?
I'm going to give it a 3. I think it's a really standout song on this album. I think it has a really cool blend of vocals. I think that it's a little slower. I noticed some things I didn't before, that there's, like, really unique variation in riffs and guitars. And I think it's a really solid 3. Yeah. How about you, Greg?
I'm going to go 3.5 because I think that the lyrical content is so incredibly important, and I'm for people moving towards a society where shame is lessened, where authenticity is increased, and where equality and happiness and authenticity run free. Hey, this is Greg. Remember how we did the natural disasters episode way back for episode 34? That episode had no guest, and it always felt like one of my least favorite episodes of the podcast. Keith and I were like, wow, this is really hard to talk about. And we recorded it months before we released that episode. So it came out 34 episodes in, but it was actually one of the first episodes we recorded. We sat on that episode for a long time because we didn't feel great about it, and we were considering redoing it, but we do so much work for this show as it was that we finally caved and released it as is. And then we quickly moved on to the next one. But it always nagged at me. And last week I was messaging back and forth with a longtime listener of the podcast, Dr. Andrew Klein, assistant professor of English at St. Thomas University in Fredericton, New Brunswick, Canada. And he told me he was really interested in talking about the song Natural Disasters due to his scholarship in Catholic studies. And the pieces just fell into place from there for this bonus episode on a week when Keith and I weren't even going to make an episode. So it was just the perfect timing. And Andrew was so gracious to come on and talk about this incredibly challenging tune. And we really break down the lyrics. We talk a lot about his scholarship, Catholic studies. And so I think that this is actually the missing piece of the Natural Disasters episode. And I am thrilled to bring you this supplementary bonus episode on natural disasters with Dr. Andrew Klein. Dr. Andrew Klein, welcome to Unscripted Moments, a podcast about propaganda.
Thanks for having me, Greg. I'm extremely stoked to be here.
I am extremely stoked that you're here as well. This is great.
Yes. Feels like to me a long time coming, not so much to you probably.
Yeah. Andrew, do you remember finding the podcast? Because you've been around, like, as far as I can tell, from like the very beginning when we started it last year.
Yeah, I think what happens is I know that you do your like nightly trawls through Twitter. And I just post about I hardly ever post about punk, maybe, I don't know, but I posted about propaganda one night. It was just like, this is it. This is so true once again. And you hit me up or followed me after I posted about propaganda. And I was like, what is this lame podcast? And then I gave you because I wouldn't normally I don't listen to that many podcasts, but I was like, well, propaganda. Okay. So then I did give you a listen, and I've been listening like religiously ever since.
Yeah, religiously. That's an appropriate term for where we're going to chat about tonight. I love it. Very fitting, Andrew. Okay, so just for the listeners' sake, can you just spend a moment and kind of introduce yourself to the audience? Tell them like who you are, what you do for a living, because I think it's going to be relevant for the content that we'll get into for the episode tonight.
Yeah, sure. So I am an English professor at St. Thomas University in Fredericton in Canada. And I'm a trained medievalist. So that means that I spent all my graduate school years, like 7 years or whatever, in the States studying medieval texts and medieval writing and all that stuff, which gets you pretty firm grounding in religious things as well. Because if you're reading things from the European Middle Ages anyways, you're reading a lot of things that have something to do with Christianity.
Mm-hmm.
And I was raised Catholic too. So that feeds into where I am now, which is teaching medieval literature at this university with the English department, but also I am the chair of Catholic studies at the university, and it's a department of one, so it's not as impressive as it sounds. But I am the chair of that, and I got the gig as Catholic studies because I am trained as a medievalist and know all this stuff about Catholic theology and what have you. So when I teach courses on literature, on medieval literature, and then I also teach courses on Catholic studies, whether it's aspects of the Catholic faith or Catholic social movements. And more recently, I'm teaching a lot of courses on what I call pop Catholicism, which is like the way that Catholicism and Catholic images show up in whatever show you're watching on TV. I did like a few courses on Daredevil and that sort of thing. So whatever you can imagine, but the way that Catholicism kind of infiltrates our day-to-day lives and sort of trying to understand why the heck that is,
Well, Andrew, I have an idea here. My brain is going crazy because, like, I have another podcast as well that you may know about religion,
Right.
so now I'm thinking like, oh, maybe Andrew should come on my other podcast as well and talk a lot more in depth about some of your scholarly work. I'm curious about like your dissertation, like what you like,
Oh, sure. Yeah.
what you really hone in on is your specialty as a scholar. What are you really into?
Yeah, well, it's a little different, except that it does tie into my interest with like propaganda, and that's that I'm actually interested in national identity and the way that we create nations, sort of imaginary nations, really. So when I read medieval texts, I look for the way that people create national identities, and that's what all my research is on, and what I focus on. So it's pretty different from the Catholic stuff, although I'm starting to enter into the kind of Catholic scholarship world more recently because you kind of start to research what you teach more and more, and I find there's lots to talk about with regards to that.
Do you have any specific thoughts on the song Nation States from Less Talk More Rock in relation to your own work?
Maybe not, except that the whole idea of a nation state is like this kind of weird a complicated idea that doesn't really exist, because the idea that a national identity could perfectly overlap with the state apparatus is kind of something that's constantly being debated in the field of kind of nation studies and all that. But all I'll say really about the song is that it's awesome, and that propaganda like hits it out of the park with getting exactly what's going on with nation states.
I love it.
And we thought they were a good idea. Then it turns out it's not so great to kind of try to align your national identity with your state apparatus.
Andrew, I'm curious about how you found propaganda and how you came to appreciate their work as a fan of music and a person who cares about the world.
Yeah, that is, I always like that question when you ask it to people, because we all come from these different places that are similar and different. And so I'll try and make it short.
Sure.
But basically, I was in a lot of punk bands when I was a kid, like in high school and then going into early college. And one of the first punk bands I was in was just like a cover punk band, like any other thing. And we did a lot of pop punk, but then my drummer, John Vilnius, super cool guy. Shout out to him if he's listening. But he said, I want to play this song. And he gave me a cassette tape that had Anti-Manifesto on it.
Mm-hmm.
And I was like, well, what is this thing? So I listened to it and I was like, just blown away by it. Like that was my first exposure to propaganda. So moving out of like the kind of Green Day kind of things that we were doing before. And it was really the lyrics that blew me away. The chords and all that were weird to me, but I could figure it out. But it was the lyrics. And I was like, the first thing, what are the opening lyrics to that song?
Dance
word
and
acrobatics
and play.
Yeah. But word acrobatics performed with both harness and net.
Yeah.
That whole idea, like calling himself out, saying like, I can say all this stuff, but really I've got the whole structure here supporting me. It's not really much of a risk after all, because I am who I am, which is, kind of a straight, white, hetero, privileged person, so he can say whatever he wants. And I was like, he's calling himself out in the song, the first few lines of the song. I love this. And I was so into it. So we started to cover a lot of propaganda, and I was the vocalist. So, you have to think about the lyrics a lot more than maybe you would if you were just playing a different instrument or not singing. And so I had to memorize those lyrics, and I was like, fuck, these lyrics are so intense, and that's really what got me hooked. The music, they weren't even my favorite like fat band at the time, but the lyrics were just far beyond anything I'd heard before. So that was the first thing. But then it was when Less Talk came out that they really got me, because I was probably in grade 11 and I was working at a donut shop. And the English assignment that we had was to fill out a journal, and you were supposed to fill it out with whatever you wanted. And I heard people write down like song lyrics or something like that, and you could still get away with it. Your teacher would check over your work, but he would just give you a check mark. And I was like, I'll just write something. So I copied out all those essays that came with Less Talk, and I just copied them out word for word in my book. And it was like the strangest activity I'd ever done. But because all these words were foreign to me at the time, right? Like all this discussion about like equal pay or no religion, or all this questioning of gender roles and all that. And copying out the words in this journal of mine I guess it kind of did like a gradual conversion, and I was just convinced by every word I was writing down. And so it kind of blew my mind. And there was no turning back after that. They became my favorite band. The album was awesome. The music's awesome. And every band since. Brief period where I dropped out. I missed Potemkin, which was too bad, because I went through kind of college rock phase and then caught up with it later on when Supporting Cast came out and I was in grad school. But yeah, that was it though. They became my favorite band back in grade 11, and they're the only band I've just kept up with for like 20 years, can't stop.
Nice. Well,
Yeah.
And I'm thinking about, your current role within Catholic studies. And you said earlier that you were Catholic when you were younger, right?
Yeah,
Like, grew up that way. And so how did you start thinking about religion? How did the band change the way you thought about religion in general? I mean, because that's something that happened for me a lot as well, personally.
So it sounds paradoxical, but the reason that Propaganda became my favorite band is because I came from this Catholic home, and I didn't have a lot of people have a really negative experience with being raised religiously, but I had like this kind of liberal leaning Catholic family that was extremely loving and welcoming, and they basically kind of lived what you're supposed to, walk the walk, if you will. And so I grew up, I didn't. We'll talk about what's in people's drawers or whatever later on, but at least from my perspective, my encounters with Catholicism were all about community kind of oriented endeavors and supporting one another. And so when I started reading these essays and hearing these lyrics in Less Talk, I was like, fuck, I'm vibing with this. Like, this is it, like, look out for your fellow man. Like, this is all the stuff that kind of is what I've been taught. And then when I read that No Religion essay, I was like, well, shit. So I agree with like everything. This is all perfect. It matches my worldview. And then it was like, but also religion is like the worst thing. And I was like, but that's like where I got all these ideas from, or at least that's where like my moral compass was aligned from. And so it was kind of a bizarre thing. But I think when people reach that point, they either have to just kind of shut the door on that religious aspect of their life or completely reject it, or else they have to sort of find a way, to rationalize and move it past. And there was one phrase, and I don't have the essay in front of me, but I think it's Chris writing those essays, or is it George? Maybe it's Chris. I think it's Chris.
Off the top of my head, I can't remember who wrote that exact one.
Yeah, it's hard to say, but whoever was writing the essay, they end it by saying, so religion, or I should say the appropriation and abuse of religion, is like the worst thing in the world.
Yeah.
And it was that I really hung a lot on that like clause that Chris or George or whoever inserted into that essay. So I was like, okay, so religion can kind of maybe still, there's like an ideal purpose for it that it could serve. And so I started to kind of move away from what might be considered mainstream Catholicism at that point in my life, and sort of made my own sense out of the thing. But one thing that doesn't come up in these essays or in these discussions is like the actual faith aspect. And if you're super like, I don't know, indoctrinated, or if you're raised in a faith group, it's not as easy as saying the faith has done bad things, I don't believe anymore, because you believe in like a lot of really deep shit. You believe in like massive mythical structures that you can't just sort of dispel because someone abused it, So I think after reading that, I kind of was like, all right, well, yeah, the religion has done really fucked up things, but there's some good that I can see and maybe salvage. And so I've kind of used that, kind of marrying those two things in my life. But I'm not much of a practicing Catholic anymore, to be honest with you. I would still, I guess, identify as Christian, but
sure.
But back then, that was like pretty earth-shattering for me as a 17-year-old living in my parents' basement.
Were you guys ever into like the Catholic workers movement or liberation theology scholarship or anything like that?
So my dad and mom were, but as a kid, I didn't really understand that. And I do understand it now, like Dorothy Day and the workers movement and all that, those original kind of anarchists, that I can appreciate now. It's kind of crazy to read that stuff and see that there's kind of a similar trajectory between Marxist and anarchist thought and how it kind of develops in the States, and also how the Catholic workers movement develops out of similar I guess fertilizer, if you will. So it's actually pretty interesting how many parallels there are, and the real problem is just abuses in the institution, which you'll find in any ideological structure.
Yeah, well, I mean, and I look into this a lot on my other podcast too. Like I interviewed somebody named Brian Kleitz, who is at Case Western Reserve University, and he researches Catholic sex abuse scandals and writes about that within his scholarship.
Sure.
And so, I've been looking into a lot of these things about, abuse and things like that, because I grew up Catholic as well. And this is something that I was wrestling with my entire life growing up until I eventually went completely out of it and I was rejecting it. But I was really intrigued by so many other religions as well, including Catholicism, that I wound up teaching about and being a high school teacher, teaching religious studies and making a podcast all about religion. So, I mean, it's like such an interesting thing to where I became not religious, but by becoming not religious in the thing that I was born into, I became 1,000-fold more interested in the world around me instead of the one thing that I was born into.
Yeah, that's so interesting. I guess we all have these different kind of responses to that confrontation, and especially based on your experience with the religion, you'll kind of be like, yeah, this thing has been garbage my whole life, And I get that impression from like Todd. Todd is from Regina, and I'm from Saskatoon, and we're pretty close. It's quite a large Catholic population.
2 hours.
Yeah, quite a large Catholic population in Saskatchewan, and so the whole evangelical Christian thing was not really known to me growing up. And I suspect that if Todd was raised in a faith in Regina, he's probably raised as a Catholic. I can't say for sure. I know George was, but I don't know about Todd. But he's the lyricist for the song we'll be talking about in a little bit, and it kind of struck me that maybe his experience was a different one, And so that would make a lot of sense to me. But I think that the way that religion gets addressed in propaganda is in fact much more complicated than, and especially as Chris has developed, is much more complicated than, say, the way that you'll find religion addressed in like black metal or something like that.
Sure.
Which is purely for shock value, And so it's not that I could see all that stuff. I could have friends that were metalheads and see all that. And that didn't bother me because it's like, it's a joke, the all the pentagrams and Satan and all that stuff. It's like, it's kind of fun and it's like Halloween, But the way that propaganda dealt with it, was the most thorough kind of actual treatment that I'd seen of religious ideas and the problems with it as a teenager at that time when I'm going to Catholic high school, So it was a huge kind of shifting in the sands, if you will. And it's a very important moment for me.
Were you a fan of Bad Religion as well? Like I'm thinking about like Come Join
I was
Us
a big fan.
from Grey Race. Like I love that song and like God's Song and all the stuff on Empires. Like I love as well for Bad Religion. Empire Strikes First. Are you a fan of them as well?
I always liked their music, but to be honest with you, I never paid that much attention to their lyrics because they didn't seem that deep to me. I know there's a lot going on there, and the discography for Bad Religion is huge, but I never really found like provocative ideas. It was more like just kind of like batting away religion or whatever. And it's easy to ridicule the thing. It's a lot harder to grapple with a thing. Yeah. And that's what I've found in propaganda is there's a lot of grappling.
I think Andrew, I think you're going to get some hate mail.
I probably will. I should be honest with you. Like Suffer was probably my biggest one. Yeah. And I think that's maybe the only one I engage with on a deeper level, but
gotcha. Yeah. Nice. Well, so we had a lot of professors on this show, and
I know it's weird.
I love it. It's one of my favorite things is that smart, thoughtful, scholarly folks like propaganda and want to talk to us about this music because, I mean, you folks are busy. Professors are busy people. You're trying to get tenure and go through the whole grind of academia and higher education. Yeah. And you take the time to come on and talk about a punk rock band, and it's really cool. But I'm curious if propaganda has any role in helping you find your career interest.
Yeah, that's really interesting. So maybe, yeah. Maybe not like from the beginning, because I never went on to like do political science or something like that. I was much more of a literary kind of minded person initially. So what really drove me to academia was this interest in like medieval shit.
Okay.
But my interests are almost always in the end about kind of understanding power structures in the Middle Ages between oppressed groups and marginalized groups and whatever kind of text I'm looking at. And I would actually attribute a lot of that to the kinds of things that propaganda turned me on to, Chomsky and all that kind of stuff.
Yeah.
we're talking about a 17-year-old, I'd never even heard of Chomsky or anything, or even thought about reading academic stuff, Refusing to Be a Man, that essay collection, like mind-blowing. And I think a lot of it had a massive impact in the way that I approached literature as I went on, so I can't say that they threw me into academia, but they did show me that there's a particular way of understanding the world. And once I started seeing that, I started to see it in a lot of literature. And I wasn't, of course, the only kind of person doing this, and it wasn't just punk bands that got people interested in this kind of thing, but it resonated with me a lot because I was already primed by, I think, punk rock and propaganda in particular.
I love it. Well, I got to acknowledge too that you did a couple of your degrees at University of Saskatchewan, which is where I did my master's degree, and where Todd's brother Kent works. So
I did not know that at the time. Yeah.
So we got a little swirling propaganda Saskatoon connection here going with me, you, and Kent Kowalski, who was on our Dark Matters episode.
Yeah, it's a beautiful city in the summer.
Fabulous city. So Andrew, we're going to talk about natural disasters, from today's empires, tomorrow's ashes. And this was an episode that Keith and I did a while back, and we recorded it as kind of like an episode that we kept in reserve for a long time. Like, we recorded it and then we sat on it in case there was a week when we couldn't get an episode out, that we would be like, all right, now we're going to drop natural disasters.
Yeah.
And the reason why we didn't have a guest on the original version was because whenever I kind of put out feelers to people, no one said that this was a song that they wanted to talk about. And I resonated with that because Keith and I didn't want to talk about it either. But we did it because this is what we do. So we did not feel that great about the episode, but we were like, okay, it's good enough. We're doing our best. We're trying to make it work. But there's no guest on that episode. And it was our first episode talking about anything related to sexuality. And it just felt weird, the entire episode. Like, we were both like, oh God, should we redo that episode? So, being a professional person yourself, coming on a podcast about a punk rock band that talks about a sex toy that depicts the Lord and Savior of a few billion people on our planet, it's pretty interesting to me that you reached out and you were immediately into talking about this song. You suggested it, and I was like, well, we got to do part 2 because we didn't have a guest. So I figured that you can be our guest for the original episode, but we'll just do this as a new thing. So I want to know why you're so interested in this song, Natural Disasters. Why were you so excited about this one?
Yeah, well, it's not even close to my favorite propaganda song, but I do like it a lot. The thing about the song is that it was kind of a flashpoint for me as a listener, where I was listening to this new album. Everything's different about the band. Chris's voice is different. Things are way faster, and I'm loving the energy. And then we get to this song, Natural Disasters, and I'm like, fuck yeah, this is great. Sure, questioning the structures, all that stuff. And then all of a sudden, we would pull out a shining dildo, one side Dink, the other side Jesus. And it was like a record scratch moment for me. I was like, whoa, hold up. Like, everything, we can always talk about religion and question everything, but it was the first time I had really heard from them, this kind of, I guess, like explicit kind of language that really kind of was, I don't know, making fun of religion in a way, or at least using things that made me kind of uncomfortable, I guess, because I was all for questioning the faith and questioning the abuses of it and everything, but then to take Jesus and put him on a dildo,
right?
For me, it was like, whoa. It was, I would liken it probably to, I don't know, speaking out of turn, I suppose, but the way that Muslims might respond to images of Muhammad,
Depiction,
yeah. It's that was something I kind of felt like, well, you can't do that. The last time I'd seen something like that, and I wasn't really into I Spy or Swallowing Shit or other kind of more explicit groups like that. The only thing that I'd seen before was like The Exorcist, when like the Virgin Mary statue has like a penis all of a sudden, and you're like, holy shit. that messes with you. Like it messed me up, as a kid seeing The Exorcist. So all of a sudden to hear this in my favorite band's song, I was like, whoa, I had to like grapple with that. And honestly, in a household where like my dad had smashed my CDs before because they were too explicit, I was like, I have to like hide this thing, like this is all of a sudden it became this taboo thing, which is interesting because I actually think that's what's going on in the song, with this kind of taboo being approached. But this song anyways stands out to me as this moment for me as like someone raised religious and then hearing this kind of pairing of explicit language or depiction with Jesus. It was a total huge moment. And then I was like, can I still like this band? Because it seems like this seems disrespectful, and it ended up being, I actually think it's a really important kind of song for this band. But and it's actually in line with a lot of things they talk about elsewhere. But when I was younger, it just stands out to me as a moment. Yeah.
And what's really interesting too is like not your dad, but dads and moms in general, while they are smashing their children's things and throwing their children's things out for being quote unquote taboo or profane or foul or corrupting or anything like that, they're also hiding similar things within the confines of the four walls of the family home that if they were to put into practice their own level of standards, they would be throwing out their own things as well. You know what I mean?
Yeah, I do. And as a parent now, I kind of recognize to some degree the kind of batshit things you do in the moment when you're like, this is not what I wanted you to be like. I try to remember that as a parent now to reflect on like what I wanted you to be or what I kind of my ideal child. That's useless and pointless. You be you, and I'll kind of find a way to support that. But there's always a part of you that wants to like be like, no, this is the right path. This is the right way to explore. This is the right belief to have. And that's what my dad was, in his clumsy way doing. But this with this one, I was like, well, there's no way I could even get away with having the CD in the same house as my family, So yeah, it was definitely a flashpoint, but yeah, that's what makes me think this song is important for people, I guess. I assume hearing the podcast, lots of people talk about their kind of having a religious upbringing and then finding this band. And I assume this struck a lot of people as kind of like, whoa, this lyric, is kind of out there in a way that, I don't know, like it's hard. I don't want to make an overgeneralization, but I feel like it might be the first time you get something like that from propaganda, like sticking the flag up your ass or whatever. It's like, whatever. But this is like, no, it just struck me as a new kind of tone, but it also strikes me now that I've listened to a lot more Todd stuff and know him better as an artist, strikes me as sort of informed by Todd's presence in the band.
I love it. Let's get into these lyrics a little bit. I am dying to know what you think about these words and what it says about our society in general.
Yeah. Well, I like the structure a lot. I know often you end up talking about music later on, but I think that the way this song is structured actually informs the way you can read it in some interesting ways. So maybe I'll talk about, I don't know, that at the same time.
Sure, of course.
But I don't even know how they write songs. With this song, I feel like Chris wrote some lyrics and Todd wrote some lyrics, and they kind of both threw them together with some riffs that they'd written, And so you end up with Chris opening up and saying, like, in which God's name will we be killed? Who's most righteous? Who's most terrified? He kind of sets the stage for the song, saying, like, this is what I want to think about.
Big picture.
Yeah, big picture. In which God's name? Let's think about why one religion is worth more than any other religion. Is there even such a thing as, why is one God better than another God? Or why is anyone willing to die for a God when it seems like we arbitrarily assign them to different nation groups or what have you, right? Who's most righteous? And it's hard to say who he's asking that of. Like, is it which group is most righteous or which person in that faith is most righteous? But these questions are kind of like saying they're all just arbitrary religions. Arbitrary, what Chris talks about them is like just ways for us to explain things. There's no one is better than the other. So why do we kind of measure them against one another? And then all of a sudden, Todd like waltzes in. Todd waltzes in, and it's almost like they're having a conversation where Chris is saying like, like, which religion is better? Like, why are people even fighting about who's most righteous? This is so stupid. And then Todd's like, I'll tell you a funny story about that, you know? And then he like comes in and he lays out this just an actual story, and like there's no rhyme to it. It's just kind of like, let me just tell you the story. When your parents left the house, we'd creep up to the room, the drawer beside the bed. We'd pull out the shining dildo. And it's like, whoa, like this is your story? Like, this is your answer to the original question, which is, in which God's name will we be killed? Who's most righteous? This is your answer. And so it just made me laugh, you know? It's like so funny that he answers with this story, but this is kind of Todd's way in his storytelling. Like, he takes stories I found with him and he kind of abstracts them. And so then when he says, we pulled out this thing, and you'll notice that like the way he describes it, it's like they find an artifact like Indiana Jones. It's like a shining dildo.
It belongs in a museum.
Yeah, it's this amazing thing. And then it says one side Dink, the other side Jesus. And it's like, whoa, this is what you found. But then it's like instantly you see that it's a symbol, right?
Yeah.
Like on one level, now I know that Todd did think it was actually Jesus and a dink at one point, but I saw him say on YouTube that turns out it wasn't actually a Jesus dildo. It was actually a pirate dildo. And this really funny story where he's like, we saw it, we just assumed it was a Jesus dildo.
Drive here in Regina. There's a family heirloom that is passed from grandparent to parent to child, and everyone has it. I have pictures of my dad with it. The neighbors have used it. We've snuck into their drawers to find it. It's a very important thing. And to tell you the truth here, I made up this cockamamie story about it that, as I found out, isn't quite true, and I'll show you why.
That never usually happens when you tell a bloody story. It's usually point for point with no embellishments.
This dildo, as you see, has been in the Craig family for generations. And my friend Chris's wife tonight, Lisa, has brought this to the show. And can somebody tell me what is on the other side of this dildo? What is it? Wow, let's see. It turns out it's actually not Jesus, it's a fucking pirate. Boo, boo, boo. Maybe I got stuck in the eye with a dildo or something. I hope it's Mom's bum. Or Janet, or Doug, whatever.
Has to be his ground.
You mean Ernie and Bert?
And that to me is such a Catholic thing to do.
Oh man.
You find this this like object and it has like a bearded guy on the other side, and you're like, well, it's a dildo, but what's the most taboo thing you can do with a dildo? You can make it Jesus, you know? And so rather than think it's a pirate, they just thought this is the Jesus dildo. And it so fascinates him that you'll notice the tense in this line. When your parents left the house, we would creep up to the room, to the drawer, we would pull out. It's like a constant thing happening. They did it all the time. They couldn't stop looking at this dildo. They're obsessed with it, you know?
Yeah.
So it's this really funny thing where his story is like, we actually were obsessed with this idea that you could have Jesus on a dildo, you know? And so it's really interesting that the next few lines, not hedonists, not atheists, but churchgoers, block parents, right? So this weird idea that I guess it's not the degenerates you would think would have a dildo, but
right. It's not the satanic panic.
Yeah. But I think one thing that came up in your original podcast was that it was about hypocrisy. And I do see that in this coming up. I actually don't think that's the main thrust of this song. Maybe there's a lot of room for interpretation, but
sure.
I think he's just kind of saying it's the regular, quote unquote, normative people that are in fact not the norm. And so, we should recognize that there's not really a norm at play here. Now,
so well said.
The other thing, this image of the dildo. Now, like I said, as a Catholic studies professor, I'm obsessed with these like Christian symbols, right? And with the Jesus dildo, I actually think it's like a really powerful image, which sounds ridiculous, but there's a lot of different ways you can read a Jesus dildo. Like on the one hand, you get fucked by religion, right? On the other hand, you fuck others with religion.
Oh man.
Right. So you wield it depending on what end of the, it's about power again, right? And another way of reading that, it's a thing of pleasure, right? So you enjoy fucking others with religion, right? Wow. And then the fourth way of reading that, of course, because we're talking about two, I suppose, people involved here, you enjoy getting fucked by religion. And I think that's all, like when I think about Todd, I actually think he's an incredibly deep artist. And I actually think that it didn't matter if it was a Jesus dildo or not that he found, it's that he grabbed onto this idea that religion is something that has been fucking with him, and this Jesus dildo all of a sudden is like the perfect emblem of that religion fucks with people, it fucks them, it fucks them up. And then people also enjoy using the power that religion allows them, right? And the really twisted thing is, and this is where it gets more towards like a kind of Catholic guilt reading, but is that a lot of people enjoy the way they get fucked by their religion. That is to say, you can make a martyr of yourself, right? You can enjoy the way it makes you feel bad. And you can enjoy displaying that to other people. And so I think it's a really interesting symbol, this one story. And I assume, this is assuming a lot about Todd, but his relationship with religion was probably fraught, like many of us growing up in religious households, where you feel all sorts of conflicting emotions about that religion, and it really does fuck you up, and in some cases really messes people up, and in other cases just gives you a lifelong complex that you're guilty about everything, but it's all there in that Jesus dildo. At the same time, it's hilarious, and it's like this little bit of hypocrisy, perhaps, right? If you don't really know, we're assuming it's a Christian household anyways, right, that he found it in, churchgoers, he says. So you've got these people that ostensibly are like, I think Keith brought this up in your podcast before, but the puritanical notion there, right? But they're actually the ones that are kind of pleasuring themselves in secret. So there's that whole aspect as well. So lots going on, I think, just with that image. And I think that's why Todd latched onto it, not because it's just funny, because all of his experience with religion so far has pointed to how it really just fucks people over.
Wow. The idea, no, that's the multi-pronged analysis there is so fascinating. And I'm thinking about the way that power is used over other people. And I think that people who do the conversion therapies, things like that, like get a lot of joy out of tormenting the people who are within their conversion therapy centers. So like that's the immediate modern example that I go to, which is currently being banned in many states in the country, but it's something that is frequently in the news, and towns across the country are fighting like a lot about it. And I see that as one of those power moves that's really visible in society right now,
Absolutely. And I know you guys brought up on your last podcast the sort of pedophilia scandal, that it was being exposed already when Todd would have probably written this song, 2000.
I think that you're the only person who actually, there's no way that you're not the only person. You're the only guest we've had who actually listened to our episode and then gets to comment additionally on what we already said. And I know that you just listened to it. Did you have any other thoughts on any of the things that came up during Keith and I's conversation? Because like I told you, that was one of our least enjoyable episodes to make.
Yeah, I thought you guys were hard on yourself in retrospect. I actually think there was a lot of good stuff there.
Cool.
I just think that it's not necessarily just about this, as we move on here, maybe to the end of the song, but it's not just about sex in the end, right? This is more about religion, what it does to you. I think this whole thing is, and the dildo is more of an emblem for what religion does to you, and not necessarily focusing on the fact that people have sort of sexual shame, although that's a huge part of it for sure. And so you guys are, I think, right to point that out in my reading, obviously. So I do think that Todd's lyrics are more open to sort of abstract interpretation, if you will.
Mm-hmm.
So that's just how I always read it. Is maybe
Gotcha.
because of those opening lines, right? That frame the whole thing.
Yeah.
Like at some point, Chris and Todd said these things go together, questioning religion in general, and then this more specific shame culture,
Mm-hmm.
which Chris picks up on in like Tertium Non Datur, right? Where he much more, I think, fully explores the issues with the shame culture. But other than that, I think you guys brought up really good things. You point out that New York Times expose about gay priests.
So we've got the rest of this song here. You kind of got to the most pristine or hiding everything, but then we have these last few lines. Is this our decaying society? These are the married ones. What about the others? Don't condemn your life to be riddled with shame. Everyone's hands cause natural disasters. And I'm wondering what your take on these last couple of lines are, because everyone's hands cause natural disasters. I mean, that's so interesting to us. And Keith and I kind of pondered this for a while and sort of gave up.
It's actually super hard to understand. So when you guys were talking about it, I was thinking the same thing. Like, there's not a clear. Here's the problem, or the maybe interesting thing about this last line,
mm-hmm.
is that, well, Chris says, don't condemn your life to be riddled with shame. Kind of like, all right, so you shouldn't be hiding things in your drawers, which is kind of this interesting way of, in fact, he probably wouldn't even read it this way, but of reaching out to the religious group that he's talking about, in saying that you shouldn't have to hide let your freak flag fly. You shouldn't have to hide this at all. So don't condemn your life to be riddled with shame. And then he says, almost as reassurance, everyone's hands cause natural disasters. Now, when you and Keith talked about it before, I thought you made a great point that when we're talking about natural disasters, it makes you think of all that kind of, I guess, evangelical kind of approach to sin. That if you sin in one way, or if you sin, then it's going to cause God to exert some sort of holy retribution on you, right? With some sort of natural disaster, forest fires, earthquakes, a flood,
mm-hmm.
right? And I thought that was the best reading of what's implied maybe here. Now, it's kind of a funny line maybe, because if we're talking about what hands do, and we're talking about dildos, everyone's sexual activity on their own or whatever causes natural disasters. We're all responsible for a natural disaster in that way, if you think that way, right? But really what Chris is doing is saying we all engage in these behaviors, and so you shouldn't be ashamed of them, right? But they title the song, Natural Disasters, which I thought was crazy, because what are we talking about then? The song isn't about natural disasters. The song is about hypocrisy or contradiction, right?
Mm-hmm.
Or the weirdness of being a person that believes one thing and doing another thing. And I actually think that maybe there's this kind of double way of reading natural disasters. On the one hand, referring to this idea that we all sin in some way, or we all do things that would be construed as sin by certain religious groups. But we also are all like a natural disaster, just walking around a bundle of contradictions that naturally exist in a way that we can't actually live up to the ideals we set for ourselves, right? And so this to me connects with all the other stuff that Chris talks about in his other songs, where he talks about how he's, in Things I Like, he says, I like the maple leaves, they remind me of me. What does he say?
Internationally reviled.
Yeah, and then the next thing, inconsistent, fragile, right?
Yeah.
He's inconsistent, and he's really honest about that in all of his songs and all of his writing. He's honest about how he's super inconsistent, and that's what hypocrisy is, right? Is being inconsistent. So I think that he's actually kind of saying at the end, we're all capable of the same kinds of sins, and we're all kind of walking natural disasters as a result of that.
Yeah.
It's an even condition to be a natural disaster, So that's what I think is going on at the end there. Although the end, I think, is also gesturing towards that common idea that by sinning that evangelicals or televangelists will say, we brought upon like some sort of earthquake or whatever because, I don't know, because we legislated gay marriage or whatever it is.
Are there any people or current events that spring to mind from current events over the years in relation to what is being depicted in these words that kind of like are emblematic of what this song is talking about to you?
In some ways, I mean, like to me, the song is about reflecting on how, on the one hand, we're all kind of hypocrites, but on the other hand, religion is also responsible for a good deal of fucking people, and so it's pretty, you can just sort of close your eyes, spin yourself in a circle and point your finger, and you'll find something that's related to religion and one of these ideas. The most recent for me would be the discovery of those graves at residential schools in Canada. So all of the discussions of what's gone on at residential schools and the way that the Catholic Church leveraged its power and both metaphorically and literally fucked all these kids over, I think that that's kind of something that's going on right now that you can't really deny. That's kind of what's going on there. But then the other thing with the shame culture, if you will, that I see happening is the constant debate in the Catholic Church or in any Christian faith group over the place of the LGBTQ plus community and the religious faith. And that's, the last few months that's been going on because Pope Francis won't apologize to the Indigenous community in Canada. And he also refuses to, in fact, make sort of positive moves forward with the LGBTQ community. And that's been a huge problem. So it's caused a lot of people to kind of live their life in this kind of shame, right? And so I think that's kind of another thing connected to this, that are sexual practices. But you guys talked about that a lot on your podcast, so I'd encourage people to listen to that.
Yeah, we went hard on that refusing to be a man episode. I tell you what, that one took a lot out of me.
Yeah, it was great.
I'm still recovering from that conversation and editing that episode. It was a journey getting those 3.5 hours put together. I tell you what.
Well, they're great, but I mean that's kind of what the Catholic Church has a large hand in creating the system of heteronormativity that at least North Americans have embraced culturally and are now kind of pushing back against. But it's kind of funny when you think about people talk about us living in a secular society now, but in fact, our sexual mores are largely dictated by a history of, if not Catholicism, Protestantism, and Puritanism. So,
well, Andrew, I know you've been a fan of the band for a super long time. I'm wondering if you have any like standout memories or stories in relation to seeing the band live or meeting them or any other like related topics that you felt like sharing for the listeners.
I wish I had seen the band more, but I will say that it was the most the most religious experience I've ever had at a concert was seeing Propagandhi when they're still 3-piece.
Wow.
Seeing them on the Today's Empires tour in a place called, I think it was called Sam's Garage or something like that in Saskatoon. And they were just awesome. I just remember Chris, he seemed angry the whole time. He had his hat pulled low, classic Chris, like super low, couldn't even see his eyes, as he was just pounding through these super fast songs. But then I remember Todd's energy was just awesome. And I loved watching him. And they closed, I think, with Purina. And the kind of wailing outro solo to that, I just remember it was a small venue. And I remember being just sweaty in that circle pit as that guitar wails. And it was literally the most transcendent moment I've ever had outside of, say, a church as a kid. Mm-hmm. It was beautiful, and it was just like everyone was just there for it. And it was the best live show I've ever seen. So that's probably my best memory of them. And then I haven't had a chance to see them live since.
The word transcendent was bouncing around in my head as you were describing that. So I'm glad that you got to the word transcendent.
Yeah, real out-of-body experience. Mm-hmm.
Exactly.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah. Do you have a favorite record from Propagandhi?
It's got to be Failed States.
Ooh.
I actually
wanted to say why.
Yeah, well, I want it to be Victory Lap because I do feel like they progress every album
Yeah.
and they get better and better. But something about Failed States, it just brings me back again and again. And I think it actually has a lot to do with my kind of vibing with them on a spiritual level, because there's a lot of songs on that deal with this kind of like, well, duplicate keys.
Yeah, I was going to ask you about duplicate keys.
What's the last line? The
universal principle of the universe is love.
Yes, exactly. And that is actually the through line I've seen through all of their records, is this idea of love. But, it's a freaking spiritual idea, and on the level he's talking about, a freaking ayahuasca trip.
Yeah.
Experiencing that. I mean, talk to religious people. That's what they feel when it works.
Yeah.
When religion works for them, so this idea of love as being the kind of thing that unites it. Like I'm big into Christian mysticism. That's like one of my areas of study, medieval mysticism. Julian in Norwich is a famous Catholic anchorite, someone who lived in like a hermitage, basically sealed herself off from the world. She had all these visions of Jesus, and that's what she saw was basically love uniting things. And like the things that Chris is describing is like basically what you'd find in like a medieval manuscript. It's just nuts. But the kind of heaviness of those lyrical concepts in that album, Unscripted Moments is one of my all-time favorite songs for sure of theirs. But that album has maybe all my favorites on it. It's so good. And every song is just so heavy, but passionate. And Beeves' riffs are awesome. That's my favorite for sure.
Awesome. Awesome. Does Propagandy inspire you like to like, in the world today? Like, what does this band mean to you as far as like the grand scheme of your life?
Every day, I think because I listen to them, like even when I go weeks without listening to them, I always come back. And because once you know them well enough, you kind of know the lyrics. And so it kind of triggers things in your head as you're listening. And honestly, the thing that I get from them isn't like their really strong stances on social issues. Those were super important, formative, but it's actually the grayness that shows up in their lyrics so often, where it's like, we don't know what the fuck we're doing in this world.
Mm-hmm.
It's really hard to figure out. All you can do is your best. And that means finding like the principle of love and following it, but it's super hard to do. And it's super ambiguous. And that's what I like about them, is that they feel comforted in the fact that we're all struggling to do the right thing. I hope. Well, that's not true, but many of us are struggling to do the right thing, right? And this band constantly reminds me that the struggle never stops, but you're also going to feel like you're doing the wrong thing a lot of the time. But if you just sit there not doing anything, then you're never gonna help, So yeah, they're a beautiful band.
Well, Dr. Andrew Klein, I am absolutely thrilled with our conversation. You just this really filled out a lot of the things that Keith and I were wrestling with in our original conversation for natural disasters. I'm thrilled that you wanted to do this part 2 with me. It really means a lot because this is a confusing one for me. It makes me feel deep confusion. And, to hear your take on it, it really means a lot. So do you want to tell people like where they can find you, if they want to like follow your work or scholarship or anything like that?
I am an academic in the end, so I can't vouch for the interest that people will take in my medieval articles, but you can follow me on Twitter if you want a friend.
Nice.
I'm at Elvish Poppet, ELVYSSHPOPET. And I'm on Twitter basically just shit posting and talking about my family. So if you want a friend that will appreciate where you're coming from with a sort of progressive view of things, then, hit me up. But otherwise, don't bother looking at my scholarship unless you want to read medieval stuff.
Awesome. Well, Andrew, there's a lot of cool people that listen to this show, so I wouldn't.
Yeah, it's true. It's true. I might
happens.
be surprised. I might be surprised.
Well, thank you so much again for being here and for liking the show, like to know that you care so much about what we're doing. It's just like amazing to me that people care about this. So thank you so much for caring so much that you were wanting to like be a part of it. It means so much.
Thanks to both you guys, Greg and Keith. I love listening to you guys. And if any band deserved this kind of attention, it's Propagandy. So I really appreciate the work you guys put into this. And thanks for having me on to sort of basically shoot the shit about my favorite band. So right on.
condemn your life, riddled with shame. Everyone's